Through its first few centuries of existence, the Christian Church went from being a relatively small Jewish sect to being a prosperous and well-organized institution maintaining formidable assets through reliable streams of income. While it is clear indeed that the Christian Church would ultimately grow to become one of the greatest powers in Western history, this rise cannot be fully understood without an examination of the financial circumstances which made it so. While the early dogma of the Church was somewhat ambivalent regarding the righteousness of affluence, the early Christian Church accumulated and maintained a considerable amount of wealth, which began with the cultural practice of sharing amongst individual Christians and intensified through a transition of authority from state to church in late antiquity. Early Christian dogma was not united in its position on the righteousness of wealth. Jesus himself is reported in the Gospels to have viewed personal wealth negatively in his discussion with the so-called rich man, where he asserted that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Luke 18:25. While this sentiment seems reasonably straightforward, some church fathers interpreted it in a softer way. Among those to do so was the famed Augustine of Hippo, who argued that God distinguished people on the basis of pride and humility, rather than riches and poverty, according to Burns. Under this theological backdrop, the early Christian church amassed a considerable amount of wealth through its first centuries of existence. This began with the practice of sharing in local churches, in which common chests were maintained through the voluntary offerings and donations of their members, especially the wealthier ones, according to Ree. This gaining of institutional wealth would intensify with legitimization of the church through Roman authority in the 4th century. After Emperor Constantine's conversion to and legalization of the faith, his patronage of the church, including financial subsidy, tax exemption, and clerical exemption from compulsively public services, effectively increased the scale of the church's wealth acquisition dramatically, according to Ree. It was through this process that the church ultimately surpassed Rome as the principal institution in the Western world, and by the end of the 4th century, having virtually captured society, according to Chadwick.